Sorry, I have to ask. Hi, my name's Andrew Harvey. I'm from Ninefold, and I'm here chatting with Jeff Casimir of Jumpstart Labs. We're chatting about his RubyConf presentation in conjunction with Ninefold and with multifaceted.io for the hub for RubyConf. Hi, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing really well. We're going to go through some questions, and we're going to get into your talk a little bit and hopefully give people a bit of a taste of what they can expect this November. Just firstly about you, Jeff, how did you actually get involved in Ruby as a programming language and in the Ruby community?
Yeah, I was teaching high school computer science at the time. This was back in 2005. I was teaching Ruby, and during the summer, I was doing an internship at the Electronic Frontier Foundation in San Francisco. My wife and I were collaborating on a web application that I was going to use in my classroom, and we were writing it. It was a Java servlet project because that was basically what I knew how to do. And I remember so clearly one day at lunch, I saw the video of this Danish guy building a blog engine in 15 minutes, and I got done with that video and said, like, scrap this servlet thing. We'll start over. We'll figure out what this Rails thing is. I'll learn just enough Ruby to write the Rails and get into it from there. So I've been doing it ever since. 8 years now.
That's really cool. Kind of going on from there, I think with that we get a little bit of a taste of it, but what excites you about Ruby as a programming language?
I like the thing that's most exciting to me is that I feel like it allows me to express ideas really cleanly and easily. I appreciate that other languages have strengths that Ruby doesn't. When you look at concurrency and speed and maybe even conciseness of code and so forth. But I love that when I write Ruby and I do it well, in the end it looks to me like thoughts. It looks to me like the pseudocode I would write of here's how a thing should work. And that's how I know I've kind of hit the right balance between creativity, efficiency, and clarity.
Awesome. Your talk is about going back to first principles.
Yeah.
What inspired you to write this talk and submit it?
Yeah, so I believe in proposing talks about things that you want to learn about. And so I learned this technique from Michael Bly several years ago, who proposed the talk, I believe it was at RailsConf, about a framework that he hadn't written yet. And then once the talk was accepted, he now had a due date for the framework that he had to build the Grape API framework by that date. So when I proposed this talk, I've been thinking a bit about the computer science that I learned back in my university days, now 12, 13, 14 years ago. And I studied computer engineering, which is a cross between computer science and computer engineering, computer science and electrical engineering. And we did a lot of hardware. And originally, when I started school, I wanted to build graphics cards. That's what I thought was like the best part about computer science. Build the graphics card, then you can play video games, and it'll be amazing. And so I started into hardware, and I really was fascinated, but also really frustrated by the way that you simulate and build hardware, and going back to things like electrical gates and simple logic and how you build that up into more complex things. And when I look back to those days of education, it frustrates me that we didn't learn very much about how to build software. We learned a lot about algorithms and data structures, but we didn't learn very much about the processes of building software. Now I'm so much better at things like test-driven development, understanding and refining abstractions, building classes and components and so forth that fit well together. So the question in my mind was, what would happen if I took all those principles and all the tools I have in Ruby and tried to apply them to those ideas that used to really vex me 15 years ago to 13 years ago? Could I start with a simulated NAND gate and then using no Ruby logic other than calling methods? So really no logic. Could I build up a computer? And so it's really a research project more than anything else. And so it started out with the NAND and built up all the other fundamental gates, the ANDs and ORs and NOTs and NORs. Went from there into adders and multiplexers, and I'm just finishing the arithmetic logic unit, which will then get combined with the control or command interpreter to create the CPU, and then going to write a compiler that takes in this version of assembly, outputs binary that this simulated CPU can process, and then at RubyConf gonna demo some kind of fundamental algorithms running on this simulated CPU that has really nothing in it other than Ruby.
Wow, that sounds very cool.
Or people are gonna get done and they'll be like, why did you do this? Like, this is a tremendous waste of time, you know. And to a certain extent, that's true. It is a science experiment for science's sake. I am curious to see, particularly for myself, like what new things I understand with a like deeper appreciation for the hardware. If I build up all these components, what does it look like to, instead of implementing this simplistic CPU, what would it look like to implement an 8088 CPU? What would it look like to compile the full x86 instruction set and turn that into binary and run it on a simulation? What could we learn along the way about how hardware works? You know, and I think as Ruby developers, web application developers, etc., we tend to be so far away from all the considerations of the hardware and understanding how all these things work down at the electrical level that part of my hope is with this talk, people come and get interested in it and say, like, I want to dig into these things. I want to understand a little bit more about what's happening under the covers.
Awesome. I'm just going to go ahead and take that. Actually, no, that phone has stopped ringing.
Oh my God, that's cool. Excellent.
What do you? Yeah. So, I suppose digging in a little bit further, like someone who walks in cold to your talk, what do you hope that they walk away with?
Yeah, I want to, my hope with the talk is that people walk away inspired to dive into computer science that's not web applications. There are so many interesting problems to understand, to research, and to practice away from building CRUD apps that are front ends for databases, you know, and we're pretty damn good at building those applications. I would like to see more people pressing themselves, and I think we see that already, you know, with the proliferation of things like Arduinos and the R2 project and controlling these machines and stuff. Like, machines are really cool, and I think if we can understand a little bit more about how they work at the fundamental level, that can influence our thinking about how they work at the macro level.
Cool. And finally, are there any talks which you personally are really excited to get to at RubyConf?
Man, if I knew the schedule better, I could speak more informed. The thing I love about RubyConf, I call RubyConf Ruby Family Reunion, and to just see and catch up with all the people I've gotten to know over the past 8 years or so that I've been doing Ruby. RubyConf, I like that RubyConf is really by the people for the people. It's the hackers conf of the Ruby world, whereas RailsConf has more of an enterprise feel to it. Everyone's there with their big team and wearing their team t-shirts, and everything's like kind of sponsored and so forth. RubyConf is bigger than a local conf, but still has a little bit of weirdness to it. You know, like, people are doing strange stuff, like this dumb project of simulating a CPU, or somebody's always like mixing drinks with Arduinos that they programmed with Ruby, or like flying helicopters with balloons, and like strange stuff. I like to see the strange things. I don't really practical things, like I can read a blog post. I want to see the strange stuff at RubyConf.